And good morning, and I'm very excited to be here with Dr. Andy Johnson. He was one of my mentors. When I was jealous of him early on when he was doing his early podcast, and then found out how to do things of my own as well. And he has been in this business for quite a while and knows quite a bit. So I'm just going to let him take over and tell us a little bit about his background and anything he wants to mention about websites and things like that. So, Andy, it's all you.
Well, my background, I've been doing the higher ed thing for about 30 years. 30 years looking at research related to literacy, literacy instruction, literacy learning. And that has been at Minnesota State University here in Mankato. Before that, I was an elementary teacher for 9 years, did my doctoral work at the University of Minnesota. And along the way, I've done a lot of writing, scholarly work, and I continue to do tutoring with kids. That's what helps me stay in touch with what is, as well as working with teachers. That's my background. Have a passion for helping kids because I know the impact that bad reading instruction has on children. And that's why I'm a little upset about some of the science of reading in this other for-profit business cloak themselves in this robe of self-righteousness that we're helping the children. We must help the children. What about the children? Well, you're hurting the children by using bad science and anecdotal records. Sam, you got me going there.
Okay.
To come to conclusions. But that's my background. And I work at a wonderful university in a wonderful department.
Well, you go, Andy, because we need voices like yours. And most especially, we need voices like yours that have both those backgrounds, the background of teaching, and you're teaching right at this moment. So, and that's something some of these folks that are out there spouting their wonderful or their things don't have, not a day in the classroom. But I'll let you get on that in a moment. Let's talk about misrepresentations and misinformation on social media. And I've listed this out as part 1, 2, and 3. So let's start with part 1. Talk about the data that shows us about this so-called crisis in reading. Andy, is there a crisis in reading, or is there a public relations program going on?
You always have to look at who's making the money. There isn't a crisis. That doesn't mean that there's not an equity gap and there's not things that we need to do better. But there is not a literacy crisis. Who's making the money from there being a literacy crisis? Who's worth $700 million? Lexis Learning, Cambium, Pearson. If you look at NAEP, National Assessment of Educational Progress, look at their scores. That's called the nation's report card. And you see longitudinal data over time, starting in 1972, that scores have been relatively consistent, if not risen a little bit over time. Now, it's normal for there to be fluctuations in scores. Yeah, there's going to be a little dip here and there, but scores have generally stayed the same, if not risen. So this idea that there's a crisis in literacy, that's based on anecdotal evidence. It's based on personal experience or bad information. I always ask, show me the data. Here in Minnesota, we have people saying 60% of students are reading below grade level. And there's no data to back that up. If you're looking at the mean comparing to our normal population, well, yes, 50% are going to be below the mean. That's called a normal population. So this idea that there's a literacy crisis simply has not been borne up by the data. Now, I hear people saying, my daughter can't read. So-and-so can't read. Parents are telling me, teachers are saying. In the world of science, that is not data. If you're going to be a science of reading advocate, you must apply those scientific principles throughout consistently and constantly. You can't be just a little bit of science. You can't be just a partial science of reading. You can't be a semi-science of reading person. you use those scientific principles. And scientific principles says that you use research-based data to come to conclusions on things. Data is different from research. Research is not research unless and until it has been peer reviewed. Now, some of the science of reading advocates, they not only have this mythical reading crisis, but they have identified the cause of the reading crisis. Not enough phonics, they say. You're teaching things the wrong way, they say. That's, again, another principle that is not scientific. They have determined, out of all the variables impacting students' literacy learning, that it's lack of phonics that's causing this problem. And they're generalizing based on their daughter's experience or what people are telling them to a large population. That is not science. Not only have they determined the cause of this mythical reading crisis, but they've also come up with the solution. More phonics, they say, systematic phonics, they say, have approved curriculums that have been science of reading approved. But along the way, they never say explicitly what there should be more of or what there should be less of. What specifically after phonics instruction? And another one is, I get this a lot, teacher preparation programs are not teaching our teachers how to read. Get that a lot. First of all, how do you know that? How do you know what teacher preparation programs are teaching? Really, how do you come to that conclusion? How do you know what I am or am not teaching? And second, we've got 3 semesters plus student teaching to get, usually it's a 20, 21-year-old student ready to teach. Of all the standards that we have to address not only reading, but writing, math, science, social studies. All those standards in 3 semesters, we can't create a finished teaching product. That's why we need continued and legitimate teacher professional development. Yet here I am with 30 years of experience, pardon me, but the state of Minnesota pays me to be an expert on literacy instruction. So who do they call to testify about reading instruction? A literacy expert? No, a radio journalist. And that's the way it is. People will believe a radio journalist, Emily Hanford, before they'll listen to someone who's actually has literacy expertise. So that is some of the information about this crisis in reading. You say it often enough, and then everyone begins to assume, oh, yes, there is a crisis. Oh, yes, we are reading below grade level average. Simply not true. Sometimes people will point to, and there's a difference between criterion reference data and norm reference. Norm reference test compares a score to a normal population, the bell-shaped curve. And that's what the NAEP data is. It's a normative population. Criterion reference says, I think 3rd graders should know this. This is the criterion that I think 3rd graders should know. And then they compare students' performance to that criterion. One is mathematically informed, the other is arbitrarily informed categories. So that is some of the myth around this mythical reading crisis.
Okay, and you just tripped one of my wires, and that is the because I've also taught all the courses in reading, including all the pre-service courses, and the understanding of the normative-based test. Even if you move the norm-based test, what happens is the whole curve shifts. So you're always going to have half and half. That's the way it's designed. So it's a self-fulfilling well, of course you're going to have half up and half down because that's the way the thing's designed. And by the way, that's one of the I'll have a brief explanation of that in the written part of the blog as we talk about that.
Sam, that was a good point. They're designed to get a nice dispersion of scores. And if everyone scored at a certain, if everyone succeeded, they say, oh, that's a bad test. We need to get a dispersion of scores. Good point, Sam.
Okay, and what happens over time is the norms. Yeah, so it's a spurious argument. And that said, let's get on to part 2 of misrepresentations, and especially some of these folks using strawmen on both whole language and balanced literacy. Especially when we talk balanced literacy, I turn to the 2 Presleys. And what the people that are talking about balanced literacy are talking about is nothing even close to what both of the Presleys have talked about as what balanced literacy is. And more importantly, is there research demonstrating that, hey, maybe some of these balanced literacy practices actually have worked over time? And I'll just let you talk on that for a moment.
Well, yes, there is research, but if you're against something, you should at least know what that something is. And these straw person arguments are made against balanced literacy without knowing what it is, whole language cueing systems. But I would refer you to the National Reading Panel report. That's the most sciencey of science of reading stuff. And you should read the actual report, not a summary of the report or what people say about the National Reading Panel report. I'm guessing most listeners are familiar with that. But it says in chapter 2, page 2-97, and I quote, systematic phonics instruction should be integrated with other reading instruction to create a, listen for it, balanced reading program, unquote. This is what everyone believes in balanced literacy. What is balanced literacy? It says, well, there's pure skills-based instruction and there's pure meaning-based instruction. Very few are on both extremes of the continuum, but you move back and forth depending on your students. Some need a little bit more structure, a little bit more skills-based, some a little bit more meaning-based, but it is not a single thing. It's not a method. It's not an approach. And what's the research to show that it doesn't work? Sure, I can give you plenty of research to show that it works. So if you're going to live by science of reading, you'll have to use the whole thing. Another one is whole language has been debunked. Show me, just send me one study, not what someone says, not what a think tank says or tells you, but a piece of peer-reviewed research that says that whole language is a failure. But that word has become so pejorative, we don't even dare say whole language anymore. That's how effective that it has been. The publishing companies have been in misaligning. The same thing with, I hear about the cueing system. Oh, the cueing system is bad. They're teaching our students to guess at words. And number one, no, we don't teach children to guess at words any more than in a phonics-based program does. But a cueing system is not something you teach. It's not an approach. A cueing system is a recognition that the brain uses for interactive, interconnecting systems to recognize words during reading. Recognizing words means we see it and we automatically know what it is, versus identifying words where you need to use some strategy. And most of us are reading efficient readers. We are recognizing the words. We use phonics, we use semantics, we use syntax, and we use background knowledge or schematic background. That is the cueing systems. And we have activities to develop each 3. Yes, phonics is important. Everybody believes that phonics instruction is important. It's not the what, it's the how, and it's the how much of phonics instruction.
Okay,
that
Andy,
there are
I'm
differences.
going to throw a prove it at you, and
Thank you.
and you did it very well, by the way, which is why I'm throwing it at you. Eye movement and eye movement research and what it shows about what you've just said. Could you just give us a quick primer on that?
Yes, and that's pretty irrefutable. Paulson, Keith Rayner, some of the others. The idea that our eyes look at every letter is simply not borne out by eye movement research and miscue analysis. When we read, our eyes make jumps, saccades, little skips, and we have fixation. That's where the eyeball lands. And we only see about 3 to 6 letters clearly at any given time. Our brain fools us into thinking we're seeing every word and every letter because it's filling in the blanks. When you actually look at eye movement research, and this is the interesting part, you see that our eyes skip over anywhere from 20 to 30% of the words on the page. Skip right over. So how is it possible that we look at every letter on the page when we are skipping over 20 to 30% of the words? Our brain is filling in the blanks. These fixations is where the eyeball stops. Saccades are the jumps and regressions. And our eyeball moves around like a little hummingbird when we read. Next time, think about your eyeballs where they're moving as you're reading a sentence. They don't move in a nice straight line. They kind of go back and forth.
So, and we're not talking about the worst readers doing that. We're actually talking about the best readers doing that. Am I correct on that point?
Yes, if you look at a struggling reader, they will read letter by letter, word by word, kind of like that. But as they get better, their eye movement becomes more smooth. And I encourage readers or teachers, look at the eyeballs of your students. You get a lot of information by following their eyeballs.
Okay, thank you. Well, final thing about misrepresentations, and this one is one that actually causes me grave concern. We've known for decades, and the National Council of Teachers of English pointed out the incredibly bad effects of retention policies, including retention as part of a program. And yet some of the things that Emily Hanford and others serve up as hey, this is the thing, the Mississippi model or the Florida model, have retention as part of that model. And the effect of retention on students in general, and especially students of color. So I'm wondering if getting rid of, if a possible common ground thing here might be, let's all agree to get rid of retention as part of any kind of statewide program. Your opinion about that?
Well, first of all, Emily Hanford is not a literacy expert. She's a radio journalist. Keep that in mind. Why would you listen to her about anything other than radio journalism? Here's the thing about retention and why it's so cruel. Yes, there's a disproportionate number of students of color who are caught up in that based on the cultural biases of teachers, and that's normal. Everyone knows that. And this is the Mississippi miracle, that if you retain a student, and in the old days, we call it flunky. If you flunk a kid, think about the emotional devastation that takes. You flunk a kid, and all of a sudden those low test takers aren't in your group. Well, then scores go up. And that low test taker gets to take the same test a second time because he or she was flunked. Test scores go up. And they say, it's a miracle. A miracle has occurred. And light shines down from heaven. But what actually happens is 2 or 3, a year or so down the line, all those scores go back to normal. And then that kid is left with that emotional debit and that label, I flunked. So retention, it's been quite clear, does not work.
Okay, and now I've had a chance to, in a very cursory way, review your new book, and it's on a topic that's of huge interest to me. So could you tell us about your new book and give us a little lowdown on that?
It's not my latest book, but it's my latest reading book. It's called Designing Meaning-Based Interventions for Struggling Readers, published by Guilford, and you can find it on my website. This is about what is reading. Reading is creating meaning with print, not sounding out words. So it helps you understand what that is. But then instead of a magical program, there is no magic program, no one size fits all. There are magic teachers, and you have a plethora of strategies for comprehension, for word work, for vocabulary, for fluency. So it's a book of answers based in theory. And I do talk about RTI and what is scientifically based research and how to evaluate and the gold standard. So it gives, you should be able to take this book and design a good reading intervention program for any struggling reader.
Okay, that is music to my ears, and I know my followers very well, and most of them are practicing teachers looking for ideas just like the ones you named. Now, we've hit a bunch of different things here and jumped around a bit. So I just want to make sure that I haven't left anything important out or anything. Actually, I'm about to say, this is your chance to say, hey, Sam, you forgot to bring up, or hey, this is the big message I want to leave readers with. So your final thoughts on this whole topic.
Big message is there are two organizations, the International Literacy Association and National Council of Teachers of English. They've had thousands of teachers, scholars, researchers, educators doing research for decades. Why would you ignore them for a radio journalist, for God's sakes? That's not good science. And the second thing, May 25th, I'm doing a Zoom discussion, and you'll be able to actually see each other and talk to us in person about what comprehensive literacy instruction is and what an effective reading intervention is.
Okay, well, I'll make it an absolute point to have a link to that because I'm positive my folks are going to be very interested in attending that. And I really want to thank you for your time and taking out your time from your very, very busy schedule. We have a final silly thing to do. It's the way I always end these interviews, and it's called a Zoom wave goodbye. So what we do is we raise our hand here and say bye, and thank you so much, and looking forward to your next event. And that's a wrap.
Thank you, sir.